We say things like, maybe later, perhaps another time, or I'll see you tomorrow. But for some of us, there won't be a tomorrow. Listen as your worst nightmares come to life. These nightmares have become someone's reality. My name is Justin Crowley, and this is The Murder Project. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 31 of The Murder Project. It is great to be back with you. I know that we've had some unscheduled breaks kind of coming up, but we're going to keep it going as much as we can, as often as we can. I just want everybody to remember that. If you just notice that there's a break in there, just know that something might have come up, but we are still hammering at it every chance we can get. Today we are going to be speaking about I'm going to be speaking about a case that involves a gentleman named Ryan Waller and the death, or murder rather, of his girlfriend, Heather Quan. This story is absolutely crazy. I just want to let you guys know that from the get-go. It's got some crazy twists and turns. It's got a little bit of drama and suspense that goes with it, and it is a wild ride. So strap in, ladies and gentlemen. Episode 31 starts right now. So this is the story about Ryan Waller and his girlfriend, Heather Quan. They live in Phoenix, Arizona, and Ryan, at the time of this incident, is 18 years old, and his girlfriend, Heather, is 21 years old. Now, what we know about this case is that the bulk of the information that was collected points to the kind of incident starting on December 23rd, of 2006. Now, the crazy thing about this is this: it will actually run through the 24th, the 25th, which is Christmas Day, and then into December 26th. So there's kind of a timeline of the 23rd through the 26th of December of 2006, and there is a lot that happens in between this time. And I'm telling you, it's when I first read about this story, and then I watched several of the videos and the interview, which I planned on playing several interview clips for you, but I'm having some technical difficulties, so I will play you a little bit of the interview so you can kind of understand where we're coming from and how this case kind of goes. Ryan's case and for the police, because I think there is a lot of, some people that are angry about how this investigation went through. And to be honest with you, I can understand why people would be angry about it. Once you get to the end of it, you're kind of like, if you're like me, your head's spinning. So in the beginning, where this story starts, Ryan and Heather were hanging out at Ryan's apartment, or I believe it was an apartment, maybe a first level apartment. And their plan for December 23rd was to hang out together, watch a movie, and they ordered some pizza. So, a casual night. It's the 23rd of December. You're getting ready to move into Christmas Eve, which is the following day. And I know most people in the United States, particularly, which speaks to my experience, get together, celebrate on Christmas Eve, celebrate on Christmas Day, and then you got a weird kind of hazy week of work that rolls right into New Year's Eve celebrations. So Ryan and Heather get together, and they're going to have a quiet night. They're going to watch a movie. They're going to have some pizza. And that's the most that we know about December 23rd at this point. December 24th moves on. Not a whole lot of information about the 24th at this point. All we do know is that nobody hears from Ryan or Heather on the 24th. The last time that anybody has seen or spoke to Ryan or Heather is on the 23rd. So that's the dates that we know at this point. 24th goes on, 25th goes on. Ryan's dad, Don Waller, tries to get a hold of Ryan on Christmas Day because the plan was that Ryan and his girlfriend Heather were supposed to go over to his dad's house, Don, and celebrate Christmas. His family's going to be over there. Everybody's going to be hanging out. They're supposed to have dinner, do the celebrations, everything like that. But for some reason, no one can get a hold of Ryan. And from what his dad says, this is pretty unusual not only for Ryan, but because of the circumstances, that being that it's Christmas Day. And Ryan and his girlfriend are supposed to be there, except they're not. And no one can get a hold of them. So I think Don maybe didn't want to be kind of a helicopter parent, wasn't trying to get into his business. So he just kind of went on the notion that Ryan and his girlfriend would show up, that something had happened or something had gone on. You know, the holidays can be stressful for people. They can be a happy time. They can be a depressing time. And everybody's got a different way of handling the holidays. But he decides that he's going to wait it out. He keeps calling Ryan. Family keeps calling Ryan. He never answers his phone. So Christmas Day moves on. Dinner moves on. Presents move on. No Ryan, no Heather. No one's seen or heard of him at this point. And I think it is at this point that Don, if he hasn't already, starts to get pretty worried about what's going on. And the reason I'll reference Don so much is because I have more of his story at this point. I'm sure there's several family members that have, you know, interjected what happened in this whole event, but this is what I have for right now. So Don decides that he's going to call the police and ask them to do a welfare check on his son. If you're unfamiliar with what a welfare check is, it's just like I said, I believe we talked about some of this on the Murder Project, but if we haven't, what I'll say is that if you have some suspicious circumstances or you're worried about a loved one, you can't get a hold of them, you can call the police. Please call the non-emergency line, and you can ask them to go over and check on your loved one. If you've seen the movie Home Alone, which is kind of dating me a little bit, but if you've seen the movie Home Alone, that's where the mom calls. He's like, I want you to go over to the house and check on my son. And the guy's like, so you want me to send a unit over to your house just to check on him? And she's like, yes, that's what this is. But the police really do that. Sheriff's office, what have you. So he calls the police, asks them to go over there. Well, after he calls the police, he decides to go over to Ryan's house as well. And I believe he knocked on the door to the apartment but did not get an answer. So he decided to wait for the police to get there. And when the police arrived at Ryan's apartment, Don was there still and waiting to see what happened. So at this point in time, it is around 1:30 in the morning on Christmas Day, which would have bled over into the 26th. So it's still, everybody's still awake from Christmas Day, but it's now 1:30 in the morning. It's on December 26th. The police walk up and knock on the door, and they don't get an answer. So I'm sure they're standing there, probably cop knocking, you know, beating on the door really hard, trying to get an answer, and no one answers the door. As the police are getting ready to leave, they hear the deadbolt and some things happening on the other side. They think, oh, someone's coming to answer the door. Well, Ryan answers the door. And they're like, hey, man, what's going on? And he's acting like he's really confused. I believe he stated that he had been asleep at the time that they showed up and that everything was good. And they're like, okay, well, as they're standing in the doorway, they can see someone laying on the couch. And the police know that Ryan's girlfriend, Heather, is supposed to be there with him. So they're like, hey, who's that on the couch? And Ryan acts like he kind of doesn't understand the question, or almost maybe like he doesn't know who's on the couch. And so they're like, well, hey, can we come in and check on her? And he's like, in the beginning, he's like, no, he doesn't want anybody to mess with him. He is kind of acting agitated and kind of being a little evasive about questioning and things that are going on when the police are trying to communicate with him. And basically what happens is they say, hey, Ryan, listen, we'll leave you alone, but we just need to go check on the girl who's on the couch. And he says, okay. I think it's also important to note at this time that when the police arrive and Ryan opens the door, it looks like Ryan had been in some sort of fight. Both his eyes are black. His nose is busted. He's got some bleeding on his face and head. And the police ask him what happened, and he says, I don't know. And that becomes a key phrase for Ryan throughout this whole investigation. I don't know. If you watch the interview with Ryan, which I will post in the show notes. He says, I don't know, so many times that it gets aggravating. And you get to the point where you're asking yourself, why is this guy being so evasive? But we'll get to that. So it looks like Ryan's been beat up. There's a girl laying on the couch. She doesn't move during this whole interaction. And so the cops walk over to the girl lying on the couch. They later determine that this girl lying on the couch is Heather, Ryan's girlfriend, but she's dead. She's laying on the couch. She has a gunshot wound to the side of her head, I believe around the temple area. They can see blood coming from the wound, and they identify this as a gunshot wound, and they notice that Heather is deceased. One of the other things that they notice initially while they're looking at Heather is that it looks like that she has been deceased for a good period of time. I imagine they looked and noticed that rigor mortis had set in or something to that nature. The body's really cold. It may be a different color than it should be, maybe like an off color. And they noticed that her body has been sitting there for some amount of time, in which I don't know if they had received information that nobody had heard from Ryan since the 23rd, or if they just presumed it had been a while, some period of time, not fresh. So they escort Ryan out of the house, and Ryan's dad is glad to see that he is alive, but he is then taken back because he notices that Ryan is being led over to a police cruiser in handcuffs. And when they walk him over to the car and put him in the back, they leave him in the car while they go back into the apartment to investigate this murder further, or what looks to be a murder. And there wasn't a gun lying on the floor or lying next to the body. There wasn't any spent shell casings. There wasn't anything that they could try to figure out, well, is this, what the situation is. I don't want to get too far into it just yet. But Ryan's dad asks what's going on, Dawn, and they tell him that Heather is in the apartment and that she is deceased, and it looks like she had been shot in the head. And Ryan, for the most part, looks like he had been in some sort of altercation, which at this time they may be linking the two together, meaning that Ryan got into some sort of altercation with Heather and she ended up dead. And so they're not sure exactly what's going on, and this is typical in any police investigation. You're going to start gathering evidence. You're going to basically start getting evidence chain, is what they kind of call it. Is you want to build all the evidence together. You're going to have multiple officers involved. You're going to have different teams of people doing different things at the same time. You're going to want to have people interviewing your suspect or persons of interest. You're going to want to get a criminal investigation team, like a crime scene technician team, together to start photographing and collecting evidence. You're going to let your superiors know. They're going to document anybody, like an evidence log. They're going to document all the evidence that's collected. They're going to document all of the people that came in and out of the crime scene. And they are going to build this evidence chain so that they can start the case building process against either a person of interest or a suspect, or if they don't have a person of interest or suspect, a way to find that person. So Ryan, during this whole time, he sits out in the police cruiser and doesn't go anywhere. This, to me, seems a little bit odd because I don't know if what the intention of leaving Ryan sitting out in the vehicle for so long is, because I know that I worked for a smaller sheriff's office than the Phoenix Police Department. So I know they must have had multiple people that could have responded to this incident, but for some reason Ryan sits out in the police cruiser for around 3 hours, from what I can tell. And it's not until after this 3-hour mark that they take Ryan down to the police station to begin a formal interview. And at this time, they show up around 1:30 in the morning, the police and Ryan's dad, Don, and it's not documented until approximately 5 a.m. that Ryan shows up to the police department to begin the formal interview or interrogation, whichever way that you know it. And When they get into the police station, they collect all of Ryan's clothes that he's wearing at the time. Shoes, if he had them, anything like that, they're going to go ahead and collect that and bag it and book it into evidence so that later on they can search for any biological evidence that might be on his clothing or what have you because of the gunshot wound and things of that nature. So Ryan is sitting in sort of what looks like in the interview, kind of looks like sort of a hazmat suit or something like that. It's just a little mesh paper material that you get kind of at the hospital sometimes. It's just like a little suit that you put on. And they give him that to wear. They sit him in the interrogation room. You can hear, some people talking and walking about. There is a handcuff that is attached to the table and then to Ryan's arm, and it kind of holds him in position. He can stand up, but he can't walk or move around. So during this interrogation, before it even starts, Ryan is very fidgety. He doesn't seem like he can stay still. He doesn't sit in one spot. He doesn't keep his hands from moving. He doesn't keep his legs from moving. He constantly puts them on the floor, puts them in the chair, puts them on the table, and then he moves up and down. At one point, he tries to stand up and walk off, and only then he realizes that his hand is still handcuffed to the table, and he can't move. And he does this several times, almost like he doesn't remember that he's handcuffed to the table that he was just handcuffed to 5 minutes before he sat down. And so he's definitely exhibiting a lot of strange behavior. And I know when I first watched this video, I thought to myself that this is a person that appears to be on some sort of a substance, either drug or alcohol. It doesn't seem like he has all of his thoughts together, or he's not aware of what's going on while all of this is going down. Like he's not grasping the magnitude of the situation that he is in. So one of the detectives comes in and sits down and starts talking to Ryan, and he's asking him standard questions. What's your name? How old are you? What level of education that you completed? Do you have a job? Things like that. Normally in an investigation, you're going to start out by asking the simple questions. You're establishing baseline information, and you want to make sure that the person that you're interviewing is capable of doing said interview. So you're going to ask them, what's your name? How old are you? Did you graduate from high school? If you didn't graduate from high school, what's the last level of school that you completed? What grade did you complete last? You're going to ask about any college, any information like that. You're kind of just setting up that baseline for that interview. When Ryan is answering these questions, he's answering them in a very odd way. He's saying things that don't make sense. Like when asked if he graduated high school, he says no. Then when they ask him what grade he last completed, he says 8th. And later on, they ask him if he had graduated from high school, and he says yes. And one of the things you'll notice from this interview is that the detective can ask the same question a little differently 3 times, let's just say, and he'll get 3 different answers. And then when he asks things about information like names, people that he should know, one of them in particular, Heather, he says he doesn't know her last name. And they had been dating. I'm not sure exactly how long they had been dating, but it was a good enough period that people around them were aware they were dating. Ryan's parents had met Heather, and there was at least a pattern of time that they had been dating where everyone in their circle was relevant or was aware of what was going on. But Ryan doesn't seem to remember any of that. He doesn't seem to act like he knows Heather that well. He doesn't want to act like, or he's acting like he is distancing himself from Heather and the people that are around him or connected with him. There's a lot of questions that are asked about if anybody was at his apartment, and they go through this process multiple times. And every time, as I mentioned earlier, every time they go through this process, Ryan answers the questions differently, or he says different people were there than were before. And when I was watching this interview, I'll be real honest, I thought that Ryan was being very evasive in his questioning. I think one of the things that is notable in this is that a lot of people, when you're brought into an interrogation or interview room, the police normally are going to read you your Miranda rights, especially in a interrogation. They're going to ask you if you understand your Miranda rights. That is, of course, what ties in with your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. And there is a standard that I think a lot of people go by when you're interrogated or they ask you questions. A lot of people think that if you are innocent, you should answer all questions because what do you have to hide? And I think that it's important to point out that your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, that applies to people who are guilty and people who are innocent. If you choose not to make a statement, you don't have to. But I think there's this kind of this perception that if you don't make a statement, well, it's because you're guilty. And it shouldn't be that way. Now, I'm not saying that this is a perspective by the police. I'm saying that this is a perspective held by most people, and some of those people could be law enforcement. But I think it's important for people to realize that you have the right to remain silent, and that is regardless of what the situation is. If you choose to speak to the police, that is also your right, and you can do that. I'm just saying and pointing out that there are options available if you choose not to speak to the police. It's not because you're automatically guilty, and I think we need to get away from that kind of that persona and that attitude. Does it make police mad whenever people do that? Well, it depends, but also they are there to do a job. Their job is to solve the crimes. Their job is to answer complaints. And so it is not, we shouldn't look at it as a downfall for them to try to collect as much evidence as they possibly can, because that's what they're there to do. So, having said that, some people will say that they will speak to the police because they're afraid if they don't, it's going to make them look guilty. But what they do is they're kind of evasive in their answering. They don't want to say too much about anything because they're afraid it's going to make them look bad. And so they answer questions in a roundabout way, or they try to distance themselves from the actual situation. And when you get into situations like that, there's two reasons normally that people will distance themselves from a incident when they're being questioned by the police. The first one is because they're scared. They're scared that when talking about the situation with the police, it's going to incriminate them, even though they did not commit any crimes. The second reason is because they're liars, and they're trying to distance themselves from the incident so it looks like they're less included in the actual offense, whatever the crime was. And so normally when you get into situations like this, the police are probably going to think the reason that they're trying to be evasive and distance themselves is because they are trying to hide something. They are lying about what's going on or what have you. So when you're listening to this investigation, and I'll be honest, I'm guilty of saying, like, I really thought Ryan was being very evasive. I thought he was trying to trick the police and maybe not necessarily trick them, but keep them guessing and delude the story and make it to where you couldn't really follow along what was going on. And in that, he was trying to confuse all of the aspects of the timeline and who was there and what was going on and what's this person's name and how do you I thought that he was trying to kind of move around all that to create confusion. And so we'll keep talking about that, but I want to play for you a little clip of kind of what happens in this interrogation. And I apologize if the sound's messed up, but this interview it's on YouTube from Across the Table, and it kind of shows the interview in its entirety. And I would tell you, please go watch this interview so you can get the full scope of it. But here's a little piece of the interview.
Do you have a girlfriend? No? You know a girl named Heather? Mm-hmm. You know Heather's last name? Mm-hmm. What is Heather's last name? The one that lives there right now? I guess, I don't know. If her name's Heather, what's her last name? I don't know which name she's trying to use as her last one. She's trying to have a real last as her nickname, so I don't know. What nickname does she go by? She probably wants the last name, Kyman. Kyman?
Which is not her last name.
K or C? K? Keep going. I don't know. How old is Heather? 16 or 17.
Which she's 21.
Is she a white girl? Yeah. How did you meet Heather? I've known her since school. Okay. I don't know. You just known her from school? She used to be a business name. I don't know.
She used to be a business name.
She used to do a business name. She used to be in my book named with business name. Oh, okay. She used to be in a class, your business class? Mm-hmm. All right. What happened to your face? I don't know. You told the officer just a few minutes ago that someone hit you. Do you remember who hit you? I don't know. I think it was Heather. Why would Heather hit you? I don't know. It was an accident. I forgot why.
So see, the case goes on, this interrogation goes on back and forth like this for literally an hour. And while the detective is trying to gather all of this information about what's going on, Ryan keeps giving these answers. I don't know. I think it was this, but I don't know. I think I might have spoke to so-and-so, or so-and-so was here, but I don't know. And he says that, I don't know, over and over. At one point, he says that Heather is the one who caused his injuries. He said that her name was Heather Kyman, which obviously we know her name is Heather Quan. And he says that she is 16 or 17 years old when she is actually 21. And Ryan knows all of this stuff. Ryan knows everything about her. He says that they went to school together. But if you remember going back, he says he didn't finish school until 8th grade. Or he finished school in 8th grade. He dropped out after that. So there's a lot of things that are going on that don't make a whole lot of sense. One of the other things he says is that the detective asked Ryan who all was at his apartment, and he says Alicia and Eric. He asked him questions about who these people are and how they're kind of involved in the situation. He says, I don't know a lot, again, and he speaks about a lot of different things that are happening in there all at the same time, but they're all different. He also brings up someone whose name is Christina, and he says that she is the one who is sleeping on the couch. And this whole time that this interview is going on, Ryan is under the impression, or he is giving off the impression, that the person who is on the couch is asleep. And when the detective says, well, they've got a gunshot wound to their head, they're dead, and he acts like he is surprised. And when the detective notifies Ryan that the person was dead, and he asks him why he did not call the police, he says, well, because I thought they were sleeping, so I was just going to let them sleep. And Ryan himself asks several times if he can just go to sleep. Will you leave me alone so I can go to sleep? And the detective's like, no, you're not going to get to go to sleep. And so there's this weird kind of exchange that's going on. And then later on, he changes his story and says, oh, well, there was someone there named Eric, and Heather was there. And so there's a lot of back and forth, and I can't urge you enough. Please go watch the video of the interview, because it's a wild ride to go down, to try to remember all the people that are involved. And then later on, he goes back and he says, my friend Richie was there. And his old roommate, Richie was there. Richie Carver. So he remembers Richie's name. And then he says something about his dad. He says, well, yeah, Richie and Larry. Larry's his dad. And if you remember in the interview, that clip that I just played, the police asked, what happened to your face? And he says, well, I think Heather hit me. And he asked, well, why would Heather hit you? And he's like, well, I don't know. And so if you see the picture of Ryan, you notice that he's got two black eyes. He looks like he's been in some sort of altercation that went pretty bad for him. It did not look like he was on the winning end of it. And if he did, I would hate to see what the other person looked like. And I hate to say that in a situation like that, because the person he's saying that hit him is dead on the couch, and she has a gunshot wound to her head. But I think something that's important for me to point out in this case, even though you may not realize this at the time, is that Heather did not have any defensive wounds on herself, on her person. It did not look like she had been beat up. It did not look like she was in a situation where she was trying to defend herself. The only thing that the only thing that was shown on Heather was that she had a gunshot to the side of her head. And so in that whole situation, it doesn't match up either, because if someone is in a fight as violent as this, Heather should have some sort of markings on her, at least on her hands. Or there should be some way for them to tell that there was a kind of brutal fight that went on between these two people, but you don't really have that. It's really one-sided. Ryan has a ton of injuries, whereas Heather has the one gunshot wound to the head. This is very confusing, and the police are trying to figure out kind of what's going on. And Ryan, being as evasive as he is, he's still looking more and more like the main suspect every minute that goes by. But as the police are talking to Ryan, he does change his story yet a third or fourth time. And this is when he brings up Richie and Larry Carver. And he says, oh, well, I was at my house, and Richie came to the back door, and he shot me, and with the bows and the arrows. And it goes on where the cop goes back and forth. He's like, you got shot with a bow and arrow? And he's like, yeah, I got shot in my eye. And he's like, with an arrow. And Ryan's like, yeah. And he's kind of getting agitated, like, why can you not understand what I'm saying to you? Why do you not realize that this is happening? When we look at it, we say, okay, you didn't get shot with an arrow. I mean, it looks like you got beat up. They did point out that they said it looked like a kind of a chunk of his nose was missing, like a little piece of it, like was gouged out maybe. But they weren't sure of how that injury actually happened. And the detective's like, so you got shot with the arrow? He's like, yeah, with the revolver. And he's like, oh, so now you got shot with a revolver? And he's like, yes, dude, in the eye. And the cop's like, I don't think you got shot in the eye. He's like, yeah, and then he mumbles about something about, yeah, and it's so that so they didn't have the casings, they didn't have the shells or something like that. And I think the point that he's trying to get across is that it was a revolver, so it didn't leave shell casings behind. But he can't articulate what he's trying to say. And so the police keep questioning him, and he's like, well, I don't think you got shot with a revolver. And he's like, oh, how would you know that? He's saying, because if you got shot in the eye with a revolver, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now, because you'd be dead. And Ryan is kind of taken aback, because he's saying, like, well, why would you say that? Because I did get shot in the eye, and you're just sitting there telling me that I didn't. And they go back and forth for a little bit, talking about how this whole situation kind of unfolds, but then Ryan's not able to maintain this level of conversation, and he starts switching back and forth. And mind you, at this time, Ryan's already changed his story 3 or 4 times. He's already given 3 or 4 different events that have unfolded during this night that is in question. And so I don't think the police can make heads or tails about what's happening. I don't think they realize what's going on. And Ryan makes a comment about that his head really hurt bad and that he wanted to go and lay down, and the cops aren't letting him. And so just to kind of move this along a little bit, the cop that's sitting in the room with him, that's interviewing him, finally decides, he's like, well, hey, why don't you let me take a look at your head? And so Ryan's like, okay. So he kind of puts his hands on Ryan's head, and he starts looking around. And as soon as he touches Ryan's head and starts trying to move it, he's like, ow, that hurts really bad. And this, I think, is when the realization smacks this guy right in the face. And that he looks on the side of Ryan's head, and he thinks to himself, oh God, this looks like a gunshot wound to the side of Ryan's head. As he looks at Ryan's face, over on the side of his nose, he can see what looks like a entry wound. And then on the opposite side of the nose, going into the eye, it looks like he can see where it passes. It looks like Ryan had been shot in his eye. It went through the bridge of his nose and went into the eye just on the other side. So if he was shot on the bridge of his nose on the right side, it went through the top of the nose into the left eye. And this is when he's like, oh my gosh, we have to get medical assistance for this man. So he leaves the interrogation room. He comes back. He had called the fire department, EMS, and they show up and they start talking to Ryan. And there's some negative feelings about the conversations they have with Ryan, where they're kind of joking and kind of being playful with him in the fact like, oh man, you got shot, dude. Like kind of back and forth banter like that, and how confused Ryan actually is. And the police detective uncuffed Ryan from the table and kind of had him sit there and wait for EMS. And then Ryan gets taken to the hospital, and once he's there, it is confirmed. Ryan had been shot in the face and head 2 times. The shot that I spoke about around the nose was actually a shot where it was just like we thought. It went into the bridge of the nose and then out the other side, and it actually took parts of his skull and fragments from the bullet and kind of blew those into the front part of his brain, which I think is why he was confused about what was going on, is because he had active brain damage. And on the side of his head, what they believe is that this shot was from kind of over on the side, and it in a way grazed his head, but it was a little deeper than a graze wound would be, where it actually went and penetrated the skin and part of the skull and then blew out a chunk of the skull right there in that one area, where if it had been a little bit over, it would have been a graze wound. A little bit more, it would have actually been an entry wound. But it actually blew off a piece of his skull from his head. And the cops realize, they're like, okay, we got a bad situation going here. And that's whenever they refocus on his story about Richie and his dad, Larry. Because now they know that Ryan has been in his apartment for what they think is probably 2 solid days. All of the 24th and all of the 25th. Walking around aimlessly, not knowing what's going on, while Heather is dead on the couch. And he can't grasp what's going on because of his head wounds. And so they think he's just wandering around in the house and going to sleep and waking up and wandering around and then going to sleep. And this cycle repeats itself until the police show up. So then they go back and they're like, okay, we know that Ryan does know people that are named Alicia and Eric. They know how Heather is connected into this situation. So now they have to go back and they need to ask Richie and Larry Carver what their involvement might be in this. And what we find out is that Richie and Ryan, who were former roommates, had a disagreement with one another, and Richie ended up moving out of the apartment. And so there was conversation between Ryan and Richie that was in a kind of toxic manner, and Richie decided that he was going to go over to Ryan's house and rob him and take some belongings. He may have thought that some of the belongings that were still left in the apartment were his, for all I know. I don't know what his motivation was, but he somehow talked his dad into coming with him, and these two decided that they were going to rob Ryan and basically commit a home invasion and a burglary. And when Richie knocked on the back door and Ryan opened it, he shot Ryan right in the face, point blank. And they believe, and I believe that from the research that I did, that the first gunshot wound was the one that went into his eye. And then as he was probably going backwards, the second gunshot wound hit him on the side of the head, and he lost consciousness. And it is believed that Richie and Larry thought that Ryan was dead. Now, the interesting thing from the interview is that for all reasons, Ryan should have lost consciousness, and I believe that he might have because Richie and Larry thought that he was dead. I think they would have looked at him on the floor, and if he had his eyes open and he's like, hey, what's going on? What are you guys doing? They probably would have shot him again, but they didn't. And so they went into the living room where Heather was, and I don't know, I've read several different stories on the accounts with Heather, and one of them is that she was sitting on the couch and she was shot. Another one was that during all of this, she was asleep on the couch and she was shot. And then a third one is that she woke up and she was cowering in the corner and she was shot. Now, the third one kind of makes me angry because there's no evidence to support that. You can't be cowering in the corner and then still end up on the couch. And from the research I did, there was no evidence that was shown that she was shot in one place and then relocated to another place. So I don't really like that third option. And I don't even consider it as an option, but I did want to let everybody know what the kind of three theories have been from people that have written about this case or done, stories about the case. But after Ryan is shot in the face twice, they go in and either I'm assuming that Heather was probably woken up at this time if she was asleep and was startled, and they walked in, had her at gunpoint, and put the gun up to the side of her head and shot her. And when she fell back on the couch, and that's where they left her. At this time, Richie and Larry go through and burglarize the apartment, and they take things that they take certain things out of the apartment, and then they leave. And then at some point in all this, Ryan wakes back up and kind of wanders about the house. But the crazy thing about this is that Ryan can recount all of the details of after he is shot, of Richie and Larry walking into the living room, of Richie and Larry Richie shooting Heather, the fact that there were no shell casings in the house, and the fact that at some point in time they had come in there, shot them, robbed his apartment, and then left. And he knew all of this. But he was also probably unconscious on the floor, so it's crazy to me to think that he had this recollection of the events that took place. Either that, or somehow in his brain, even though he'd been shot in his face, his brain, in his thought process, he was able to put together the events of the night, but he didn't know how to say it. He didn't know how to explain it. And I think that is absolutely crazy because Ryan didn't have anything to do with this. And now at this point in the conversation, we know Ryan had no part in this. He was a victim in this just as much as Heather was. But for some reason, he was still able to tie all these things together but not actually get the words out. So Ryan while he's in the hospital, he ends up losing both of his eyes due to the damage that he had. And they had to surgically remove parts of his brain that received shrapnel damage. And so it is safe to say at this point that Ryan was never going to be the same guy that he was before this incident happened. And poor Heather, his girlfriend, she was dead. And all of this took place over a argument and bad feelings between two former roommates and their want of burglarizing an apartment. And I think it's absolutely heartbreaking for both parties in this situation. Now, unfortunately for Ryan, about 10 years after all of this took place, he was still suffering from seizures and other remnants of this attack. And he had a seizure at one point, and that was directly related to the shooting. And about 26 days after all of that happened, this last seizure that he had, he passed away from his medical conditions, the seizures and things like that. And police directly tie this in to the incident, that the severe injuries that he sustained were the cause of his death. Richie and his dad were out to seek revenge for whatever reason. And so I know Richie, which is the son and Ryan's former roommate, he was convicted in June of 2008 for felony murder, burglary, aggravated assault, and misconduct involving weapons. And he was sentenced to a term of natural life in prison, plus 26 years, I believe. Or natural life, we can just say that to be safe. Now, the interesting part for his dad, Larry, is that he was also charged with these crimes, but the only evidence they had on him, because I don't believe that Richie made any statements that incriminated his father, is that his father, Larry, had made a confession of sorts to his wife, but she invoked her marital privileges and refused to testify against him, basically, and the case got dismissed, which it really kind of makes you angry to know that all of that happened. And but the upside, the silver lining, as they say to this, is that Heather Quan's family appealed to the legislature to enact what would later be known as Heather's Law, if anybody's familiar with that. And this basically, they were trying to make it to where, and ultimately the court ruled in favor, to make it to where in circumstances like this, the wife or the spouse could not invoke a marital privilege. And they ended up winning that, and Heather's Law went into effect, and Larry Carver was later re-indicted, and I believe this is around November of 2011, for the same type situation: first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, burglary, and aggravated assault. So this went on for a 10-day trial. The jury deliberated, and thankfully, this is not another case where I get to say the word hung jury. They deliberated for 2.5 days, which is pretty good length of time for a jury trial, and they reached the verdict of guilty on all counts, and Larry was also sentenced to life in prison. Now, I'm not sure if Larry gets a crack at parole or not. I hope to God that he doesn't, but this is one of those situations where I think that, looking at all the events, there's a lot of things where, especially if you watch videos of the interrogation, there's at least 4 or 5 of them where pretty much all of the people that are doing the videos are saying about how poorly the cops did on this job, and how much that they tried to make Ryan the suspect and essentially denied him medical care for all of these hours, 6 hours, I think, in total, before he received medical care, from the time the police made contact with him, 5 to 6 hours, to the time that he actually was in the hospital. And I know that we can look at it saying that they should have paid more attention, and then the other side of that is that they were trying to investigate a crime in which they thought they had the suspect in custody, and that he was being evasive. So in saying all that, I know that there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of conversation Mike and I can have about this case and about the details and kind of how it unfolded. And I can't wait to do that. So y'all know what's coming up. It's going to be the debrief episode on this case. And I think it's going to be a pretty good one. Mike and I always try to give you our best on that. But this is a situation where I feel like there's a lot that could go one way or the other as far as how do you think the police should have investigated this, and what do you think should have happened in the meantime while all the investigation was going on. So I'm going to leave it there for this episode. I can't wait to talk to you guys again on the debrief, because I know I'll have some more information that I can kind of give you guys about the case as usual, and can't wait to talk to you guys again. We'll see you next time. Goodbye. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to this episode of The Murder Project. Our downloads are going up, our numbers are going up, and we have you guys to thank for that. If you're looking for us on any of the social media platforms, you can find us on Facebook. We're at The Murder Project. If you need to type us in to search for us, we're at facebook.com/podcasttmp. If you're looking for us on the old Instagrams, we are at The Murder Project. And if you are looking for us on the old Twitter box, we are at The Murder Pod. Also, don't forget to go on any platform that you're listening on. If they have a like button or subscribe button, please hit that. And also leave a comment or review if you can. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, please go in there, hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, and hit that 5 stars. Go ahead and just bang that thing out. Give us a 5-star review if you can. We'd appreciate it so much. I'd also like to mention that we received our first viewer emails. We got 2 of them. Thank you so much for reaching out to us. If you'd like to send us a question or comment and it's in longer form, you can always email us. Please use it if you need to. We are at contact@themurderproject.com. And as always, Mike and I will get back to you as soon as we possibly can. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode. I look forward to speaking to you again on the debrief. But before I go, please remember, head up, eyes up, and stay alive.